like, you were surrounded by the crowd. And before I knew it, there was a very, hissing sound. And I looked up and I saw a side, which was there, which kind of sliced through the canvas. And it kind of came between me and the driver. And it just hung there. So if there was if it had moved by a couple of inches, one of us would have got grievously hurt. And before I could recover from that shock, uh, I could feel that somebody was holding on to my hand very, very, rough. That while designing Siri and while designing Alexa, what would you and I understand? That, the team would largely consist of, technology experts, right? Software developers, coders, etc., who will kind of build this, let's say, solution, the system. What surprised me was that in this project team, there were novelists, poets, and dramatists.
So, hello and welcome to another episode of the podcast. Now, I think it was John Keats who said this that until it's experienced, it's not real. Now, I'm not very sure whether he said this or not, but our guest for today has a lot of experience under his belt for sure. So, let me tell you something about him. He started his career as an executive magistrate, and from therein, he switched on to the corporate side. And this is the 1980s, guys. From that time, he has served in the high ranks of many organizations. To name a few would be Times of India, Virgin Mobile, IBM, HCL, and few organizations under the Reliance umbrella. And right now, he has his own firm by the name of Pates Consultancy. And with that, I would like to welcome Mr. Sayantan Nandi on the podcast. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Varun, and thank you for the introduction. The organization which I currently run is called Pages Consultancy. And as you very rightly said, that, I have had a fairly long career in the world of work, starting, as I said, with the bureaucracy, which was in the state civil service, and then moved into the corporate world. And there have been various milestones in my journey, which obviously I've gathered over the years. And I thought that this would be a good opportunity to share some of those experiences with you and others, and which I believe would come in helpful in their own individual journeys.
Definitely, sir, especially for people who are of my age or who are maybe probably younger than me. I think listening to people who have been through that journey, it really helps to shorten that trajectory. Now, when we speak of this, while I was just researching for this podcast, I was thinking that since you started your career way back in the 1980s, so the landscape of work or the work environment, if I could say, would have been very different because I am assuming there would have been no internet, no PCs as such. So how was it working back then as compared to, the 2020s? How was it, sir?
So I think that what you said is absolutely right. The landscape of work was very different. Of course, we did have PCs at that time.
Oh,
Internet was not there.
okay.
We all worked on desktops, and of course, as you very rightly mentioned, they were relatively new, and but you know, at least organizations which I worked in use them regularly. But I think what is important here is not so much the use of technology, but the way we worked. And I think your question is very relevant because when we started working, or rather, uh, the world of work during the 80s and 90s was something which was very well structured, right? There was an organization, as you well know, that all of us kind of had a regular job. Most people joined one organization and remained with that organization for the major part of their lives. There was a hierarchical structure within which they operated. There were fairly set rules. And, the most interesting thing which I would like to mention here was that the world of the career, in the world of one's own personal life, was somewhat, there was a distance between the two. They were kept apart, right? I mean, honestly, the linkages were there, but you, as they said, that you never carried your work home, and you had your personality, which was your professional personality, and at home you were a different person. And these two worlds, there were very discrete boundaries between the two. That was one. The second, of course, as you very rightly said, is that there was more of manual and personal interaction. Because in the absence of the regular use of email or internet, the communication was on a one-on-one verbal basis, right? And so people relied largely on physical meetings. That was one very important aspect which was there. And then again, as I said, that there were fairly clear, I would say, roadmaps which you could build, which, as you know, that each organization had a roadmap of, let's say, the next 5 years or 10 years, and they could kind of work on that, roadmap, each milestone being covered with clearly detailed processes to follow that. I mean, it was, as I said, a very structured and process-oriented environment. And personal relationships were very important at that point in time, because that kept the glue of the organization together. Having said that, I would perhaps, build on your question and say that while the world of the 80s and 90s were somewhat different because technology enablement happened later, the essential nature of work largely remained the same. I think what actually made a major difference, and that's something I would like to kind of talk about, is that, till the pandemic, there was a certain environment, or I would say an ecosystem of work which existed, which radically changed post the pandemic. It is not that some of the processes or some of the trends were not visible pre-pandemic, but what the pandemic accentuated or accelerated were some of these trends which changed the world of work forever. And what we see today, there is very different from what existed earlier. So that, I think, is a major change which has taken place in the world of work. And here, let me take for a moment to explain why I'm using the word work instead of a career. Right? Because you see, earlier, as I said, that people did regular 9 to 5 jobs. They were associated with an organization. Today, the world has changed dramatically in the sense that it is no more physical. We don't necessarily have to go to offices. It's largely remote. At best, it's a hybrid model where you go to the office occasionally and operate from your home otherwise. The other thing is that you are today using a lot of technology to enable yourself significantly, which is resulting in a, a sort of disconnect between colleagues, individuals, and teams. Right. So that is the other thing which is. The third thing which has come in is that the 9 to 5 job as is existing is actually on the wane. And what I think is coming up and will slowly start kind of taking over is what we call the gig economy. Are you familiar with gig economy? Yeah.
I've heard of it, sir, but if you could just elaborate on that, that will be really great for me and the listeners.
Yeah. So essentially, what is happening is that you see, today we are actually focusing on certain tasks, projects, and their relevant skills, right? So it wouldn't be surprising when, let's say, someone, let's say, a finance expert, is required initially to set up some of the financial policies, processes, and frameworks for an organization at a particular time, right? And then the organization possibly needs someone who can do business as usual, right? He does not need to kind of create those initial frameworks. So this individual then moves over to another organization offering his services. So what I am trying to say is that today the requirements of the employee and the employer may not necessarily be permanent. And what it entails is that employees also understand that, my relationship is with a particular activity, with a particular task, maybe with a particular team for a finite period of time. On the other hand, the organization, as it is embarking on its journey or is in the mid stage of its journey or is kind of plateauing and wants to go to the next level, is also looking for skill sets, behaviors, and expertise which may change. So, the very dynamic of the world of work has moved from what was somewhat static and permanent to a far more dynamic environment. And that has been further, I would say, it's been further enhanced by the use of technology, AI, for example. So that is what makes this a world of work where people like you may find themselves in the next 5 to 10 years being uh, asked to provide a certain expertise or a skill set rather than saying, look, I'm going to hire you as a manager or as a vice president, so on and so forth. So that's where the world of work is going to change and morph and become a completely different ecosystem from what it is even today.
Yeah, actually, that is very interesting when you put it up. I think the boundaries between employee and an employer is definitely undergoing a change, right? So it's more of project oriented or task oriented relationship that one can have. Now, even if we talk about the future or maybe the past, there is one thing I wonder would be common there, and that is the human factor, right? Because
Right.
at the end of the day, the economy is for the humans, the skill is for the humans, and the value is for the humans. So the human factor would remain the same. So if we correlate all these things, the past, present, and the future, what what exactly does the human factor entails? What are the components that would help one thrive according to your experience when you see the past and now what's happening and what you maybe project is going to happen in the future? What is this core skill set of human factor that would help one, thrive?
So let me. That's a very interesting question and a question which obviously needs a certain amount of explanation. And let me start by saying that there is a quote by very senior management, uh, I would say, expert who was also the CEO of a company called Honeywell, Larry Bossidy, who said that at the end of the day, you bet on people and you don't bet on strategies, right? So at the end of the day, it is about people. So while we all talk of AI and robotics taking over the some of the human tasks, which it well does, let me start. Let's say by giving you our answer, uh, almost kind of working back. So let's assume that today you and I use smartphones, right? And we use smartphones, and if you have a iPhone, you have Siri, and you have Alexa. If you have Amazon, if you use Amazon, etc., etc., and you have other, I would say, voice assistants, as they call it. Now, recently I was reading an article which was very interesting, which said that while designing Siri and while designing Alexa, what would you and I understand? That, the team would largely consist of, technology experts, right? Software developers, coders, etc., etc., who will kind of build this, let's say, solution, a system. But what surprised me was that in this project team, there were novelists, poets, and dramatists who were hired by Amazon and Apple, respectively. So you might ask that, this is a technology solution. How are these people who are actually essentially from liberal arts and essentially creative people being part of the project team? And there comes my answer of the human factor. When they actually design, they first designed what is called a personality prototype of the solution. So what you will notice is that Siri's persona is very different from Alexa's persona. While Alexa is
Excellent
a
point, sir.
right.
Excellent point.
So, and that input can only come from humans who are dealing with behaviors and the human personality. So, when I talk of the human factor, we must remember that at no point in time can we overlook or overemphasize the importance of the human factor as we continue in our journey in the world of work. And there is another interesting thing I would like to share with you, which is that very recently, McKinsey, they had looked at the world of work, and they said that let us see how future citizens, they didn't even call them employees, they said how future citizens will survive and succeed in the future, right? And what they did is they took a huge amount of data, and they kind of, and that, they crunch data and ultimately they come out with a model. That's a standard uh, activity which they do. And what they determined is what they called distinct elements of talent. And the abbreviation, the acronym was Delta, right? So they didn't call it skills and behaviors as is commonly used. They called them distinct elements of talent. And these distinct elements of talent were 56 attributes, right? Which were clubbed into 4 quadrants. And what is very interesting as well as surprising is that while one quadrant was very, very obvious, that it was known as digital literacy, which all of us are very familiar. The other 3 quadrants, so out of the 4 quadrants, please keep in mind that one quadrant was digital literacy, but the other 3 were cognitive skills, uh, interpersonal skills, and self leadership. So they said that if the employee of the future has to survive and succeed, he has to have the right mix of cognitive, interpersonal, and self leadership skills, along with digital literacy, to make him successful in the world of work in the future. So it is very evident, Arun, that these 3 other quadrants we are talking about, and I will elaborate on that shortly, are connected to the human element, right? The human skills. They are human skills largely. And that is why they need to be emphasized. So, as we go along, what do we simply understand? For example, by when we look at what we call cognitive skills, right? What do we simply understand? I mean, basically, adapting to new environments. The ability to tell stories and relate experiences. So that is something which comes in cognitive skills, right? And then, of course, we have interpersonal skills, which relate to empathy, humility, and then of course self leadership, where you handle crisis and you exhibit resilience. So these are, I'm giving you random examples to just highlight the fact that these skills will not become obsolete, rather they will become increasingly important, even in a world which is becoming remote, in a world which is actually being driven by AI, in a world where the workplace is becoming flexible, and where the world is becoming increasingly or moving towards gig economy. So these skills will become relevant, and I would say very, very important going forward. So if this is the scenario which we are currently with, right? So then I go back to the other part of your question. When you said that, now how do you relate this with the past? You see, I mean, this is very important. I've understood. I've also understood that, yes, in the world of the future, these will be needed. But, Mr. Nandi, I mean, where does the past fit into all this? Or where does experience fit into all this? Right. So here I will kind of, go back to, let's say, my own experiences, and possibly now that we have fairly understood what is required, let me kind of, share some anecdotal experiences as well as some other case histories which may be relevant to illustrate what I have just said. Right. So, let me go back to the first one. Right. So, we are talking of uh, the ability to kind of tell stories, the ability to empathize, and understand other people. Right. And these come through very, very short, very, very small things. So while I was working in Virgin, for example, you know, that till very recently, there were we used to hire people who were seen to be medically fit, as we call them, right? But with the increasing emphasis on inclusivity
So
and
would you like to explain C to B for the listeners, for those who are not aware of it, for the jargon?
which one did I
C
didn't use?
C to B C to B. You just said C to B, right?
No, I didn't say it.
Okay. So then, can you just please repeat yourself? I just didn't get it.
Okay, so I think that what we talked about. Let me go back a little. Right. I think let us focus on, let's say, one of the behaviors which are important, are considered among the others, which is considered to be important, and how some of our past experiences and help us to kind of understand it better and use it better, right? And how they were relevant. So if you remember that, when we used to hire people earlier, right? We used to have a medical report, right? The person has to be fit and no diseases, etc., no disabilities, so on and so forth. But increasingly, with the world changing, we are having very, very strong emphasis on inclusivity, right? And inclusivity means that people with disabled, right? And that is shown. So, what I, when I was in Reliance, we were designing the whole, the office infrastructure. And when the so-called the architects and the civil engineers came, they had a very standard design for office cubicles and entrances and exits, etc. And then, we were a core team which were, we are supervising the whole activity. And we said that, look, guys, I mean, you have designed the whole thing based on the assumption that we are going to have able bodied men and women coming in. But as an organization which believes in inclusivity, we are going to have a significant amount of hires, at least 10 to 15%, who are going to be physically challenged. And therefore, we need not only ramps to be designed in the building, but also the restrooms and the toilets have to be designed accordingly. And this, Arun, I'm talking about in the late 90s. Now, that is something which is a standard, right? Today, we have that as a standard. Now, where did that come from? That came from a deep understanding of the kind of people who we want to include in our workforce. And I would say is behavior which is which continues and will have to be needed today, right? So, this is a very small example of how you can actually use some of your experiences and some of the behaviors which you have practiced and carry it over, despite the fact that the world of work is changing. And as we have seen, that there is equal, if not more, importance given to such, behaviors and skills to succeed in the world of work of tomorrow. The other element which we spoke about, if you remember, is that the ability to handle problems, right? And the ability to kind of communicate at the same time, understand the needs of people, and use a complex situation with solutions which are drawn from the interaction between the person who's facing the problem and the person who's responsible for solving. So this is an area which I think continues to be, I would say, a constant source of challenge for organizations and employees in the future. Okay. So when I started off in my career, I was, as you very rightly mentioned, I was doing the job of a deputy magistrate, and I was, all of 22, and I hardly had any experience. All that I'm talking to you now, all the management jargon which I'm sharing, I didn't even know of their existence. So what I had to rely on, as I am talking about, is the human factor, right? I had to I had nothing except that in my arsenal. I mean, I was my own teacher at that point in time. So, with that backdrop, let me share this experience which I went through, which was that in the you know in the early days of my career, I was given the responsibility of conducting a election in a rural area. Right, that is part of your experience. So as the the returning officer of that area, I had to ensure that it was, as we all knew, and free and fair election. With that brief, I was traveling in my vehicle, and you can imagine a scenario that in a typical village environment, there was a jeep which hardly managed to kind of move. It had a canvas top. I had a driver who was on the verge of retirement. I had a person who was behind me who was, carrying a musket, which was maybe a handover from the Sepoy Mutiny, and a wireless which was there. And so it was a very old fashioned environment which was there, and you can imagine that it was quite challenging. And this area, which was uh, you know area which was dominated by a certain community, right? Because it was next to a mosque. It was the Adina Mosque, which, by the way, is, till very recently was the second largest mosque in Asia, right? And nobody seems to know about it. It's in the it's in a district called Malda, which is in Bengal, and it's in ruins now, but it has recently been picked up as a heritage site, and some work is going on. It's a massive structure, and the polling booth was just next to it. And I suddenly received a message, which came over the wireless, saying that there is some kind of disturbance there. Could you please go and see what is wrong? So, as you know, as I told you earlier, that I was, a young man at that time. So I decided that, even kind of without getting any further brief, I decided to go right in there. I saw a fairly large crowd dispersed, standing, and my jeep proceeded towards the polling booth. And as soon as I came in, crowd closed in, and it was like, you were surrounded by the crowd. And before I knew it, there was a very, hissing sound, and I looked up, and I saw a side, which was there, which kind of sliced through the canvas, and it kind of came between me and the driver, and it just hung there. So if there was a kind of, if it had moved by a couple of inches, one of us would have got grievously hurt. And before I could recover from that shock, I could feel that somebody was holding on to my hand very, very, roughly. And I turned around and saw a young man, unkempt, looking at me and saying that, who are you? So, I was young, I did not have any background. So I asked him, who are you? And he said that, I kind of head this locality. So I said, what is it that you want? And believe you me, Arun, at that point in time, I was not really getting into any lesson in communication or question answer. I was just saying what was coming spontaneously. And he said, we want to vote. So I said that, so please go ahead and vote. Because again, I had no preliminary knowledge. And as he then explained and to me and said that what actually had happened was that, as you know, there is a specific finite time for voting. And there was these people had lined up to vote, and they had been given these slips to enter. Because please remember, I'm talking of the early 80s. The election system was far more, rudimentary than it is today, and the line ended somewhere, and then suddenly there was a burst of rain. And what happened after that was that the crowd dispersed naturally and took refuge in the mosque. And when the rain stopped and they reassembled, what happened was there was, a little time left uh, for the completion of the voting process. And then the polling officers stuck to the rule books and said, look, I mean, you just have about half an hour more, and whoever can come in and vote in the next half an hour can vote, and the rest cannot. And naturally, the crowd turned extremely, violent, because they felt that their voting rights were not being allowed to be exercised. And as you know, what happens in these, semi-rural or rural areas, they are, a little on the wild side, as they say, and they immediately started kind of creating a lot of problems. So I had two options, right? One option was to exercise the official line, right, and ensure that uh, the vote is not allowed, and there is we call in maybe policemen to control the crowds or disperse them, and the other was to actually uh, ensure that what they rightfully felt they needed to exercise their voting rights, they should be allowed to do so. Now, this thought process, again, as I would like to say, I did not go through a problem solving process, disaggregate the problem, break it out into discrete parts, and then come up with a solution. All this happened in a matter of minutes, if not seconds. And I assured the leader that voting will take place. And I also, at the same time, in a firm but polite manner, told him that while the voting will take place, I would expect that it is done in a disciplined way, and it is his responsibility that he controls the crowds and ensures that there is a line which is sequential and the voting is conducted in a proper manner. I then got out of my jeep, walked to the office, and told the two polling officers that whatever time it takes, we will have to be there. I will be physically present and ensure that the number of people who are here, who have come to vote, are allowed to vote. And I walked out. I again called that person who had initially accosted me rather violently and told him that I have ensured that this is going to be done. And now it is up to you to complete it as soon as possible. And after that is done, you will treat me to tea, chai. And the person who had actually, held my hand roughly and was trying to grab me by my collar, and the crowd which was actually trying to, you know, uh, physically wound us and cause damage. That entire crowd, Arun, for the next 1.5 hours was absolutely disciplined, and the whole election was conducted smoothly and successfully. Now, when I think back, and I did have my, chai in the cooler with that leader when we completed the exercise. And after that, as you have mentioned, and we all know that, I went through various experiences in my career. I went through various interventions, various management programs, training sessions, uh, but none have been so important as the one I experienced at the earliest stage of my career. And now, if you kind of uh, try to connect the past with the future, and we look at that today under the lens of a case history, you will see that some of the skills which today McKinsey is talking about as important to survive and succeed in the future were very much being practiced at that time. One, obviously, was to create the sense of empathy that, I am on your side, I understand your issue. And that's how I kind of won over the leader as well as the crowd, right? The second was the ability to handle a complex issue through a simple solution. The complexity of the issue was that here was a situation which could have become a law and order problem, could have spilled over into a political issue, could have become a logistical issue, could have become a government issue, in terms of adherence to policy or non adherence to policy. There were lots of kind of moving parts. But I simplified the problem by saying that, look, this is a need which just kind of needs to be addressed through a very open and shut situation. Get these guys to vote within a stipulated time and actually diffuse the situation. And that kind of problem solving was used by taking, quick thinking on one's feet. Now that is not something which for there I don't know of a course, maybe you do, on quick thinking, but that's something which I did at that point in time, right? The third thing which we talk about is kind of self leadership. So at that point in time, I did not have to wait for instructions. I mean, in a typical government situation, I should have called somebody and waited for instructions, etc., etc. I took the call, right? And from a situation which was very, very crisis ridden, I managed to get out of it. It was absolutely a situation where, if you just look at it the other way, some of us may not have survived and got out of that situation if the crowd turned really violent and went into what the answer is very simple. So all the lessons which we are supposed to learn through the course of programs or sessions, actually uh, the opportunity provided me to kind of not only learn those lessons but execute some of the behaviors which are uh, considered to be important today. And this is one example of many, right, which tells you that the human factor at the end of the day still continues to be the biggest currency, the most valuable currency in the world of work, uh, whether it was in the past, in the present, as well as in the future. So that's something which gives me implicit confidence and faith to say that that is something which is very, very important and integral.
Indeed, sir. I don't think so. Any management school can teach you that. To save your neck, nobody teaches you that. It's only life that teaches you that. Now,
Right, right,
coincidentally, as you're saying this, I was reading a book, Range, and in that it is a very deep read, and there's one interesting story over there. So it is about the 1986 or 7 disaster of the Challenger space shuttle. That was the first time NASA lost a spacecraft in orbit. So they have this famous motto, I guess, lying in their control room in Houston, that in God we trust, and the rest are asked to bring data. So just before the launch, the last night, they had an emergency meeting with the contractor, and the contractor pointed out that, see, we have certain data which points out that maybe up to a certain temperature range, this mission won't be successful. But the NASA
right,
officials were not very convinced, because according to their logic, there had to be some sort of tabulation, some sort of data. And somehow, as according to what they have provided, it won't be very wrong to say that NASA was in a haste to launch the spacecraft. So, and unfortunately, the next day, the very same thing happened, and 7 or 8 billion astronauts lost their lives. Now, the point in consideration here, according to me, is that sometimes, there could be a chain of command and there could be a chain of communication. The chain of command is very necessary for execution, but at the same time, the chain of communication is very important. Sometimes you have to go out of, you know, go go treading on your instincts, go out of the SOPs and something like that. So that was something that I could very relate to what you were saying, that how you saved the day actually, and saved yourself and the other lives, more importantly, because that is something that I don't know who would teach anywhere except life.
right.
So
And,
that is
and and it was not a question. You are very right. It was not only a question of saving myself and the saving the lives of my colleagues. It was also the most important thing for me was that it was something which I did which was fair, because all these people felt that I was being fair, and I got something done, not because I wanted to save my life. Yes, it was, but at the same time, the solution which I provided was a balance of survival and being fair. Right? These people got their opportunity to cast their votes, and that's where I would say that the human factor is something to be. I would say, drawn a lesson from the experience. And this is where I always feel that the importance, as I said, of the human element cannot be overemphasized. And there is another, since you talked of Range, Range is a very good book. I've read it. It's an excellent book. And there is another very interesting kind of, I would say, case history, which I don't know whether you are familiar with or others are familiar with, where you actually take the needs of the others and how you fashion a solution by being uh, innovative at the one on the one hand, uh, understanding the needs of others, and then also taking a situation, as I mentioned earlier, which would be a situation of crisis, but turning the challenge into an opportunity. Right. So, are you familiar with the SAS story, the SAS airline story?
I don't know. So I don't
No.
know about it.
Okay. So the SAS story is a very interesting story. So here was a couple traveling with their infant on a kind of world trip on the SAS Airlines. Now, the airlines could be SAS, the airlines could be Lufthansa, but it's the lesson which comes out from this whole, I would say, anecdote, which is very important and highlights the importance again of the human factor, right? So, which was that, since this was an infant, uh, they were carrying actually a lot of packets of milk which was specified to the infant's requirements. And so that is something which they had to carry because they were moving from one location to the other in Germany, if I'm not mistaken. And unfortunately, when they had kind of, because it was not something which they could carry on board, they had kind of put it in their check in luggage. And uh, that got misplaced by the airlines. And so therefore the whole journey uh, was translated into a huge problem for the couple, and they then started complaining to the airlines. They said we need to kind of speak to not only the pilot but the manager, etc., etc., the usual thing which happens. So the captain, the pilot, he said that if you allow us a few moments, can we try to solve the problem? So they said, how will you solve the problem? Because this was specified by the doctor, you know, who was who had recommended that we carry these bottles of milk with the right specifications. So they said that can you give us the number of the doctor? So they said, okay, fine. You want to speak to the doctor? Speak to the doctor. So they reached out to the doctor and asked him that, yes, this mishap has taken place. So we are in a different city. So could you tell us how we can procure something which is similar, right? So the doctor heard them and said that if you are in this that particular city, you will be able to kind of procure these bottles of milk for the infant, which would be very similar, if not identical, to the one which I had recommended them to carry. And so the pilot told the parents that please wait in the lounge, right? We are organizing this in the next, they took a specific time from them. And within, sooner than later, they were supplied with the entire, I would say, the packets of milk and bottles of milk which they had to carry. And not only there, as I told you, they were traveling in different locations. So the parents were naturally very overwhelmed by the fact that they went out of their way, they spoke to the doctor, they took the trouble of kind of purchasing those cartons of milk and bringing it over and handing it over to them so that they could continue in their journey without further problems. So they were anyway very, very happy when they came back to their final destination, which means that when they returned home, another surprise awaited them, which was that there was an airlines official who greeted them and said that we are very sorry that you had to go through this. We hope that we solved your problem. But as something which we would like to show as a gesture, here is a coupon which we are giving to your infant, which will allow him a lifetime of free travel in our airlines. So you see how a challenge was turned not only into an opportunity, but what actually happened. See the very clever and intelligent solution which actually took place, which is that by handing over this coupon for a lifetime of free travel, the airlines was also ensuring that this was an infant after all. I mean, the person would take some time to grow and become a young man. By till that time, he would be dependent on his parents as and when they travel. And since he had a lifetime coupon free from that airlines, the parents would mostly be compelled to travel in that very same airline. So you see how, again, human skills become very, very important in succeeding in the world of work, which is the matter of today, right? We are talking of today. So that is one other famous example which has stuck to me in terms of understanding other people and using the human skills to build effective solutions for the future.
Wow, sir. I mean, these stories, they teach you a lot because if something that has been constant for millions of years from the time that we were in Africa to the time that we are in these modern jungles, it's this human mind and the psychology that operates behind it. So that's a no-brainer. And there's so much profound wisdom that he has really shared with us. And I know that to encapture the whole thing, it will definitely take another episodes, and I would like to limit it here so that our listeners also have the time to digest what they have really heard. Because for me, I have to go through this episode again to really, again note down what I have heard and try to apply those things in my life. Because I think nothing can compensate for the experience that you have shared with us, and that is something that we all have to gain on our own. But the experiences that you have shared will definitely help us to maybe have a smoother trajectory. Maybe uh, learn from those experiences that you have and then try to incorporate those in our own lives. And I would
I
really thank you, sir, for sharing so many stories with us and coming onto the podcast.
Well,
Yes, you saying?
I'm so happy to have shared, at least one personal anecdote and then another which has stuck to my memory for a long period of time. However, having said that, as you very rightly said, Arun, the fact that the the human factor, or I would say the human skills, continue to be important uh, as we as the world of work changes, and the as I mentioned earlier, that the post-COVID world with its flexible workplace, its remote style of working, the world of work which is changing from a 9 to 5 job to assignment based gig economy, to the use of inclusivity, to the very strong application of AI in all aspects of life, right? Despite all these major changes coming into the landscape of work, what remains extremely relevant even today is the fact that there are some skills and behaviors which are kind of underscored by consultants like McKinsey and others, and even Forbes has, and the World Economic Forum has identified some of these skills as important And one of the data points I would like to share with you is that the World Economic Forum in its 2023 report has said that 55% of the employees who are currently working today will have to kind of reskill and re engineer themselves. And in the process of doing so, some of the key areas which they have to focus on are human skills.
Wonderful. I mean, it's after all, even if it's a machine, it's the human sitting behind the machine or managing it or developing it. After all, isn't it all for the humans itself? So the human skills, I
Absolutely.
think, definitely are the most paramount factor that can help one develop oneself, one skill, and the society at large as well. And I would really like to thank you, sir, for coming on to the podcast and sharing so many profound experience, anecdotes, and stories and concepts that would really help me and my listeners in their life. So thank you for that.
It would make me very happy if your listeners find it relevant, uh, because I do realize that in the questioning method which you kind of adopted, it did open up for me the opportunity to speak on a lot of things. So like they say today that you have a overload of data. I hope that there is no overload of what I said which needs to be processed. I would be
No, no, sir,
happy if.
I don't think so. I don't think so. It has been a very good, it has been a very good episode in the sense the way that things have been connected. And to, in fact, to draw out things of value, there has to be certain depth. And that is all there is, I think so. So really thank you for
Thank You're welcome, Arun. Thank you so much for inviting me.
that.